Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, it's a war on terror, and you're either with us or against us. Those are the marching orders for the news media in Egypt. The Olympics get underway in Sochi, but one of the few critical outlets on Russian television goes dark. It's just a magazine, but the clinic has proven to be just the tonic for journalism in Chile. And the Super Bowl ad that wasn't, a commercial that gets under the skin of the NFL.
Native Americans call themselves many things.
That's our web video of the week. Egypt is in the midst of a self-declared war on terror. A political party that just 8 months ago was the elected government has since been branded a terror group, and there seems to be no middle ground in this debate. Egyptians are either for Field Marshal el-Sisi's so-called security solution, or they're considered to be with the terrorists, the Muslim Brotherhood. And since the middle ground is where news organizations are supposed to operate, the media have come under huge pressure, including Al Jazeera. The network stands accused of pushing a pro-Brotherhood line. Some of its journalists are behind bars, charged with undermining national security and being members of a terrorist organization. The treatment of Al Jazeera's journalists has sent a chill through the foreign media contingent in Cairo. But the government says as long as national security is not threatened, journalistic freedom is guaranteed. Much of Egypt's local media have aligned themselves with the Sisi government. Others have to be very careful. This is a tense moment in Egypt's history, and reporting this story can be a high-wire act. Our starting point this week is Cairo. Three voices on the media story coming out of Cairo. The Egyptian working for a media freedom organization on the case against the government. The journalist columnist with an Egyptian newspaper who says the government has a case against the media. And the academic tracking the coverage from London, including the video that emerged this past week of the arrest and interrogation of Al Jazeera journalists at the Marriott Hotel in Cairo. Al Jazeera has chosen not to show the video, only stills from it, but you'll get the idea.
That video was very strange. The music and the production techniques was like almost a thriller, you know, almost like one of those television programs about capturing some criminals. And the computers and the microphones and so on were all shown as though these are important pieces of evidence.
وامسك شوية العيال دول وديهم السجن واقفل. شوفوا الفيديو بقى.
First of all, it was leaked to a pro-army station. The way it was framed shows those journalists as spies, creating mistrust by adding suspense music, talking about a plot and framing of the Egyptian people while they're not allowing any rights for the defendants to have their lawyer present when they are investigated.
It's quite problematic. It has a propaganda tone to it. The journalists are questioned about the sources of money they get, and they are interrogated in ways that make them seem they are doing clandestine undercover work. The Egyptians are gonna look at that and say the government's taking care of all these international agents who are destabilizing Egypt. So it has a domestic purpose.
And I think it was intended to send a message that if you do not collaborate, cooperate with us and follow our rules of the game, then we are going to get you the same way as we're getting these people.
3 Al Jazeera news channels, Al Jazeera English, Al Jazeera Arabic, and the network's Egypt-based channel, Mubashir Misra, were hugely popular among Tahrir Square revolutionaries. To various degrees, all 3 channels have been criticized since for what Egyptians call a pro-Muslim Brotherhood bias, especially in late June of last year when protests triggered the coup that removed President Morsi just a few days later.
ما حدث ليس عزل للرئيس ولكنه خطف للرئيس.
The network's critics say this dispute is not really about journalism. What it comes down to, they say, is geopolitics.
I think this is an outcome of actual governmental tension between the Qatari government and the Egyptian government. And in that respect, Al Jazeera is not perceived as being an independent, professional, acting on its own news organization, but rather a political arm of the state of Qatar. And when you have regional clashes and regional antagonism, then journalism becomes the place where these proxy wars, political wars, are fought.
Trying to understand the geopolitical situation is really important. One of the issues about revolutions, if you are in the process of state building or nation building, then you might want to use media to mobilize populations behind you. But we're not living in that time where we have only few media systems that are state media systems. We have different media, we have different voices.
The arrest warrants issued against Al Jazeera included names of journalists in Egypt now, some who have worked there for the network in the past, and one name of a Dutch journalist based in Cairo who says she has never worked for Al Jazeera. She fled the country, politely declined our request for an interview, but did go on the air in the Netherlands with her story.
En ik heb spullen gepakt en ook logeerspullen, want ik durfde niet meer thuis te blijven. Ik dacht, de politie staat misschien klaar om mij te arresteren. En dan, ik hield er rekening mee dat ik die avond in de gevangenis zou zitten, in de beruchte Torah-gevangenis, waar die andere 3 Al Jazeera... Ik heb helemaal niks met Al Jazeera.
The social media campaign #FreeAlJazeera staff has won international support, which is no mystery, given that CNN, The Guardian, and other global outlets have also been criticized and sometimes threatened over their coverage.
3 of my colleagues are in jail for doing their job, as you know very well.
Conspicuously absent from the social media push, however, are the names of journalists employed by Egyptian news outlets, the vast majority of which back the interim government. TV news in Egypt today resembles American journalism post 9/11, right down to the graphics. What U.S. outlets trumpeted as the war on terror, Egyptian channels have rewritten as Masra Tuherib al-Irhab, Egypt fights terrorism.
The military have had a plan to sway media organizations to their favor. Most of those have already been pressured and intimidated by Morsi supporters over the course of 1 year, so they were easily swayed to serve and to work with the military government once Morsi was ousted. It's for them served as an opportunity for payback. So this tactic of divide and conquer was used by the military to discredit and reduce any potential for unity among journalists against repression.
The CBC network, the On TV network, and the stars who give the talk shows there, Lamis Al-Hadidi and Khairi Ramadan.
بنحبه. أنا من المنحازين إلى الفريق المشير عبد الفتاح السيسي.
All those people, they are the big supporters of the turn Egypt is taking. As a TV presenter, you have to take in consideration the mood of your viewers. That's, I think, the motivating factor here, is that they're operating just like any other market. You're driven by ratings and viewership. Is that perfect for journalism, as in like seeking truth in absolute terms? Probably not.
Journalism in Egypt under Hosni Mubarak wasn't perfect either, nor was it under Mohamed Morsi. But under those 2 presidents, journalists and news outlets made their unhappiness known. Under Field Marshal El-Sisi, there is a relative silence, even on the jailing of fellow journalists. A silence that, in a country whose media have been among the loudest and most courageous in the Arab world, says it all. Our Global Village Voice is now on the sensitive state of journalism in today's Egypt.
Since the ouster of Mubarak, the military regime in Egypt has just been running a public relations campaign. What we see currently in Egypt with the arrest of Al Jazeera journalists and other foreign journalists, all of this is possible and supported by a lot of Egyptians because there's been this culture of delusional fear. You're either with us or you're against us.
The situation in Egypt is quite troubling. Those that have been charged for things like using illegal equipment, broadcasting false news, and being a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is clearly an attempt to criminalize legitimate journalism work by the Egyptian authorities. And I'm fearful for what it will mean for the future of the country and the possibility for democracy.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Last week, we reported on Russian media and the Winter Olympic Games in Sochi. Now one Russian independent TV station is facing pressure after criticism from the government, and it's being cut loose by its network carriers. TV Dozhd which means rain in Russian, was dropped by its last main network carrier on February 4th. That happened just after the channel posted a survey on its website, which was quickly removed, asking whether Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg, should have been surrendered to Hitler's Germany during World War II in order to save lives. The Putin administration reacted quickly. Dmitry Peskov, a presidential spokesman, told Russia's Interfax news agency that TV Dozhd had gone beyond what was acceptable from the moral and ethical point of view of our people. The siege of Leningrad, which lasted 3 years and claimed 1.5 million lives, is a seminal event in modern Russian history. Prosecutors have opened an investigation into whether the channel broke any rules. However, Russia's media regulator has already said that the channel violated the law, which requires media outlets to respect the public. TV Dozhd earned its reputation as one of the few Russian TV channels willing to criticize the Kremlin by reporting on anti-government protests and giving airtime to one of President Putin's critics, the anti-corruption campaigner Alexander Navalny. The head of TV Dozhd, Natalia Sindeyeva, said the actions taken against the channel amounted to a clear case of censorship, telling Reuters that the Leningrad survey was a fantastic excuse to tighten the screws on us. The authorities have been looking for this excuse for a long time. Once again, the New York Times finds itself at the center of a dispute over journalism in China. Austin Ramsey, who joined the Times last year after 6 years in Beijing with Time magazine, was forced to leave the country January 30th after the foreign ministry said he broke visa rules. However, Ramsey's colleagues at the Foreign Correspondents Club of China see it differently. It is difficult to avoid the conclusion that the authorities are punishing the New York Times, their statement read, referring to stories that the Times printed back in 2012 on former Premier Wen Jiabao's family, which had grown mega rich during his time in office. A number of journalists at the Times and Bloomberg, another outlet that's done stories on government corruption, had visa issues back in December that were solved only after a direct appeal from U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. Both the Times and Bloomberg's websites, as well as the BBC's China service, are still blocked in China. And recently, more names have been added to that list, including the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, The Guardian, Le Monde, El País, and Süddeutsche Zeitung, all of which have been inaccessible since the publication last month of new revelations about the offshore wealth of the families of Chinese leaders. Ecuador's new communications law is now 7 months old, and it's being used against a journalist in a case that's a bit of a caricature. That's because the journalist accused is a cartoonist, Xavier Bonilla, who works for El Universo, one of Ecuador's biggest selling dailies. This cartoon was published on December 28th, showing soldiers breaking down the door of opposition journalist Fernando Villavicencio and running away with computers and boxes of files. Villavicencio has in the past been sued by President Rafael Correa for libel. Ecuador's media oversight agency has hit the paper with a fine, and it's ordered Bonilla to correct his cartoon because regulators consider it defamatory or liable to promote social unrest. The New York-based Press Freedom Group, the Committee to Protect Journalists, sees this as a dangerous precedent. The CPJ's Americas coordinator, Carlos Loria, said it has been apparent for some time that Ecuador's new communications law was designed to muzzle journalists critical of the administration. That this has been extended to cartoonists is ridiculous. On the Listening Post, we spend a good deal of time monitoring the Fourth Estate, and sometimes we find that when the news media fail to fulfill their obligations, political satire can fill the vacuum. The Clinic from Chile is an example of that. When the magazine was born in 1998, it was just a counter-cultural underground pamphlet, but it soon grew. In a country still dealing with the fallout from the dictatorial Pinochet era, where journalists have admitted to being complicit through their silence in the human rights crimes committed during that time and accused subsequently of failing to go back and properly tell that story even in retrospect, the Clinic's surreal and absurdist humor has found an audience. Not through the militant rhetoric of the traditional Latin American left, but rather with a finely honed irony and enough edge to engage even the most cynical reader. It is tough to find a politician in Chile who the Clinic has not ridiculed, a taboo it has not discussed. Religion, sexuality, birth control, corruption, indigenous rights, they're all in there. And somehow the magazine has grown into one of the more influential and respected sources of political journalism in the country, a sign perhaps that Chile and its media may finally be moving on. The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro now on a magazine that was born in Santiago but was conceived in London.
A magazine that would have Augusto Pinochet turning in his grave. He's been photoshopped as Che Guevara, as Frankenstein, as a mobster, as Darth Vader. One of the most famous front pages was when he died in 2006. That photo of him lying in wake, tampered with, one eye open, warning the people of Chile that Big Brother was still watching. These days, the clinic not only lampoons Pinochet's memory, but the entire cast of the political elite. From the incoming left-wing leader, Michelle Bachelet, to the blunder-prone outgoing right-wing president, Sebastián Piñera.
The clinic takes up the satirical tradition of 19th century journalism. It fills a niche because of its irreverence. It's able to surprise us by breaking norms of what is expected. The magazine represents an impertinent and dissonant voice in the concert that is the homogeneous media in Chile's transition, which tends to just echo the voices of those in power. It shakes up what journalism should be about.
The clinic owes its title to a news story that broke on October the 16th, 1998.
Augusto Pinochet, former strongman of Chile, is under arrest in London.
Pinochet was having treatment in a private hospital called the Clinic.
Before the clinic, papers were very conventional in terms of form and content. They all copied the examples from the Northern Hemisphere, like the Wall Street Journal or El País. The clinic competes with them. The front pages rupture what you expect to see. At the beginning, you couldn't work out whether it was a serious paper or not. In a way, they were doing it on purpose. They were mocking the traditional press, so full of pages, so full of formality, so full of words, but saying so very little.
Apart from the traditional subjects like human rights, it has also offered different opinions in debates that were previously taboo: sexuality, drugs, and all those value-laden subjects, which those mainstream outlets did not want to broach.
Because although the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet ended in 1990, it cast a long shadow, silencing voices, suppressing memories. The country's mainstream media has struggled to cover the reality of Chile's painful past, and the clinic was one of the few voices that broke through that self-induced censorship. The magazine had humble beginnings as a bi-monthly black and white newsletter with an initial print run of just 13,000 copies. Some 500 editions later, it's published weekly with almost 140,000 readers, more than 500,000 Twitter followers, and a website with more than 3 million visitors a month in a country of around 17 million people. And it's getting that kind of attention, not just because of the rude gags, but because readers know they can't find this kind of content anywhere else.
The clinic has branched out. It's doing in-depth investigations, high-profile interviews, and provocative political analysis. Last year, the magazine led the way in its coverage of the 40th anniversary of the Pinochet coup. It published a 68-page report exposing torturers. But it's not just the human rights story that the clinic has managed to tell differently.
At the beginning, the human rights issue was central to our output, but I think that time moves on and some of these attempts to keep memory alive end up sounding trite. What does remain key is to defend democracy. We were the first ones to establish a relationship with the 2011 student movement. We took to the streets alongside them because we feel part of the movement. We even invited them to guest edit one of the issues.
It's become a media outlet that generates opinion and which brings issues to the public sphere, so much so that it's setting the agenda. So when Michelle Bachelet came back to Chile to announce that she would be standing for president after 4 years away from national politics, the first interview she gave was to the clinic.
Cutting satire, wicked parodies of the powerful, it's a wonder the clinic's never been taken to court. And it doesn't just tout left-wing voices. There are right-wingers in the newsroom too. Still, most advertisers won't go near it. So it's managed to build another kind of business model. By selling merchandise and opening a bar called The Clinic. And since 2005, It's been the best-selling magazine in Chile.
With the clinic, there's a sense of anticipation when it comes out on Thursdays. And that's an interesting phenomenon. It's very instinctive, and it shows how the magazine garners loyalty in people.
Often we think that formal papers, with all the visual and linguistic conventions that give them their sobriety, that kind of journalism is the purveyor of truth. But that truth is just as constructed as the one the clinic offers. It's just that the clinic breaks that vertical relationship and positions the journalist at the same level as the reader. The journalist is a guy you might find in a bar. He's talking to me about the same things, but in a different way. It's not journalism as we traditionally understand it, but it doesn't mean it's not talking about what is real, and it doesn't stop it having substance.
Our humour is central for this. What grows without humour is totalitarianism. Totalitarianism of different kinds, religious and political, because people need to know how to laugh at themselves. And to be honest, I think the magazine actually occupies a larger space than it should. If the clinic had come out of a country with a lively plural press, it would have just remained a marginal outlet.
Things have changed in Chile since the times of Pinochet. Next month, the first woman in the country's history to be voted president will be sworn into office for the second time. But that doesn't mean that there won't be photos to shop, politicians to rib, taboos to break, truth to be told. Because Chileans go to the clinic for the kind of treatment of the news the mainstream media won't provide.
More Global Village voices now on the clinic and its impact on journalism in Chile.
The major newspapers here are conservative, so the clinic is kind of like a fresh voice that blends in-depth reporting and very serious issues that affect Chileans with humor and satire. The humor makes it a lot easier to digest, so they appeal to a wider audience.
It doesn't pretend to be informative. It doesn't pretend to be a classic newspaper. It's a cultural media that captures Chilean mood through fiction, humor, and some journalistic content.
Finally, each year, gazillions of dollars get spent on ad time during the NFL's end-of-year showcase, the Super Bowl. We're going to show you an ad that didn't make it onto the air because the people who produced it couldn't afford the $4 million for just 30 seconds of airtime. It's about a long-running campaign aimed at Washington's NFL franchise, which is known as the Redskins. One does not have to be a graduate of the School for the Politically Correct to consider Redskins to be a racist term. The National Congress of American Indians released this video on its YouTube channel, listing some of the things that they call Native Americans that have nothing to do with the color of their skin. They've dubbed this the commercial the NFL would never air. It's at 1.4 million hits online, and we've made it our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Navajo, Blackfoot, Inuit, and Sioux. Survivor, spiritualist, patriot. Sitting Bull, Hiawatha, and Jim Thorpe. Mother, father, son, daughter, chief. Apache, Pueblo, Choctaw, Chippewa, and Crow. Rancher, teacher, doctor, soldier. Seminole, Seneca, Mohawk. Native Americans call themselves many things. The one thing they don't